Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, you are, go ahead and have it, you can sit right there, yeah, absolutely. So you are a legend in a lot of software development circles.
I should hope so.
You got your start at Microsoft, and one of the things I was just telling you before we got on, I was doing a web search to find out if the Black Angus steakhouse in Redmond still existed. And
oh, I hope not. Yeah.
The reason I ask this, you've got a great anecdote, and we want to talk a little bit today about some of the disconnect that happens between companies run by recruiters and marketers and business development people and CEOs and developers who actually write the code. Tell us that anecdote about the Black Angus in Redmond.
Yeah, that was interesting. At the time that I started working for Microsoft, they did most of their recruiting on campus. They hired computer science graduates, and in order to interview them, they brought them out to Redmond, put them up in a local hotel, and gave them a whole day of interviews on the Microsoft campus. And at the end of that day of interviews, the assumption was we probably want to sell you on what a great place it is to work for Microsoft and how amazing it would be to come live in Bellevue or Redmond or whatever. And so the way they did that is that they organized a dinner at a steakhouse with somebody who was probably an alumnus of your university. And so inevitably what would happen is you'd go out to Black Angus for dinner, and that would be the recruiting thing. And I think what the recruiters...
Extremely awkward conversations for 2 hours.
Extraordinarily for computer science. Yeah, it was just like this really awkward formal dinner in a fancy not so fancy steakhouse, which is not something that any 21-year-old nerd programmer really wanted to do with somebody that they had never met, under the stress of this also being a job interview.
Absolutely. So I like that anecdote because it speaks to the situation a couple decades ago. That said, it feels like there's been some evolution among companies in an understanding of how to bring developers aboard. Although maybe that's not entirely the case. If you were going to be recruiting a software developer today, and I know you do, what would you do? How would you get that person on board?
I think it depends a lot on the person. You have to find out what they're actually genuinely interested in. I think the improvement has been that we've substituted the let's take them out to Black Angus to, oh, they would probably enjoy a hackathon, which is just sort of like let us substitute column A with column B. And the recruiters still don't understand that fundamentally programming is a solitary activity. It's something that, I'm not saying that programmers are loners by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying many of them are introverts. And if you're going about the recruitment in a process where you're trying to get developers based on what you think you might like if you went to a new city, you might be having sort of the opposite effect.
Yeah. So one of the things that you like to talk about is the environment. And part of my goal here with this session is to share the perspective of the developers so people in the audience know what to expect, whether or not they're developers. And actually, it's a good little litmus test here.
Yeah.
How many engineers or developers, software engineers or developers in the audience? Okay, good amount. How many people who hire software engineers and developers? Okay. And how many people who work with software engineers and developers? Okay. All right. So the work environment, in many ways, this is what I think is the high mark for workspaces. Does anybody know where this is? This is in Seattle. As you can tell by the skyline. This is Facebook's posh new workplace. So the high end here, but then you go inside. Yeah, you go inside, and this is the environment. It's beautiful, but it's an open workspace.
This is interesting. I mean, they built the main Facebook campus in Silicon Valley is a new building that is 8 acres under one roof in a single room. It's just a gigantic. And when this was announced, I think Facebook was very pleased with themselves that they had built what they thought was the ultimate, most amazing place for developers. And if you went to Hacker News and read the comments, 99.98% of the comments said, I would hate to work there. In the meantime, Facebook pays probably 50% more than everybody else is paying in the market to hire developers, which I usually take as a sign that developers don't want to work there.
That's interesting. So one of the concepts that you talk about is flow, and the fact that a developer can sit down for 2 hours and do 2 weeks of work, essentially, or maybe somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, and that's sort of the interesting thing about a developer's work is that it's creative work and it requires a high degree of concentration. And the more things you can keep in your brain at once, the faster you can code by orders of magnitude. So being able to keep 10 or 20 things in your head at once and recall them very quickly is going to make you substantially more productive as a developer for that period of time. So this is a state that most developers recognize called flow. They get in it. They're really, really able to crank things out. And any interruption is going to interrupt that.
So our culture and our offices are going so far away from that at this point.
Pretty
it's the
much.
open office. Because one of another thing is that headphones don't solve the problem because somebody can still tap you on the shoulder.
Right.
So if you were designing...
And you have to listen to music. That's
Right.
not helping you concentrate.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were designing an office, how would you design it?
Private offices or work from home, and that's the way we do it. At all three of my companies, we either provide a developer with a private individual office with a door that closes and natural light, or they work from home wherever it is that they live. And I think the productivity is high. It's very easy to hire people. It's
But the idea, and possibly the trade-off is here, communication is great, in quotes, right?
Yeah.
So how do you compensate for that?
I don't think if you actually look at what happens in communication, this is the architect's argument, and also the budget-minded person, which is, hey, let's get everybody in a room together, and they'll overhear things, and they'll communicate by talking amongst one another and amongst each other, and that's actually ideal for a trading floor. So go ahead if you're Bloomberg and you want to put your programmers, they want to trade, let them overhear conversations and so forth. For programmers who need to concentrate, the communication that's required is actually directed communication. Like there's certain things that I need to know as a developer, and I don't want to accidentally hear it. I actually want to, read the check-in logs from the version control system. That's how we're going to communicate. I want to be able to go into a chat room and say, does anybody know whatever, and have them come into the chat room later and see the message that I left behind and maybe respond when it's convenient for them. Whatever communication is happening among developers, there's probably a more sophisticated way to get it to happen at the right level using the tools that the developers built for themselves.
Yeah, it seems like there's an opportunity here because the talent crunch is so intense. Couldn't a company just come in and break through by making a big deal about the fact that they have private offices for developers?
I think so, and what they actually have done in the last 10 or 15 years since I started writing Joel on software is, they haven't done the private offices for developers, let's not get carried away here, but they've figured out what the trappings are of a great work environment for developers, and they've created espresso machines and chocolate fountains and ping pong tables and beanbag lounges with primary colors,
right,
and all kinds of stuff that creates
stuff like this.
Yeah, 80% of the illusion of, look, we actually care about where you're going to work and we made an amazing place. And that fools a lot of the people. It's not a bad thing, actually. I don't think it's, it's definitely better than nothing, but nothing compares to a quiet workplace.
Okay, so let's talk about the Joel test.
Oh, wow, yeah.
This was written originally in 2000, you wrote this. And does it still apply?
Still applies.
Yeah, so what are the most important things here?
Let me put it in context, since everybody can read the words of the Joel test. This is something that I gave developers to ask when they went on an interview for a new job as a programmer. These are the things to check in to see if the place does it, and just get an idea of whether this is a place that is more or less doing software development in a relatively modern, professional, and sane way, or if they're just kind of shooting from the hip and they don't really know what they're doing, and it's discombobulated. And the idea is just to get a high number. And the goal of things on the Joel test is not to be an absolute comprehensive guide to software development, but to be a list of 12 things you could easily check and get a quick, easy yes or no answer.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, are there any folks in the audience who can say, yes, we do every single one of these things? Yeah. Oh, there's one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So why is this so important?
Everyone is important for a different reason. I mean, I wrote about this, like you said, in 2000 because I started out my career at Microsoft in the 90s and observed at the time that Microsoft had figured out a lot of stuff about how to do software development with some reproducibility and some sanity that a lot of other companies hadn't figured out. And it wasn't universal at Microsoft, and it wasn't completely non-existent elsewhere, but it was really surprising at how much of a higher level of just the basic core skills of developing software that had been figured out by the Microsoft Corporation and the development teams at Microsoft, especially the Excel team, and how much better they had figured out about, like, let's just do these things, and then the software we produce will be better, and people will be sane and happy. And it was surprising that this stuff had not spread to the outside world, and maybe not surprising because it's not like universities were teaching, how to do software development, software engineering, management lifecycle, how to treat developers. The stuff was you either figured it out or you didn't figure it out.
What other cultural tips would you give folks in the audience about making a company that's really accommodating and actually empowering is more important to developers?
Yeah, a part of it actually, the number one tip is probably get some leader who is a developer, or somebody that came from a developer position. The other 1,100 tips are on my blog. So go
Over
to
the past 20 years.
and read. Yeah.
Understood. So that's a little bit about the culture. Let's dive into some of the tools, and some of these are, you're going to need to explain some of them. But this is some of the results from the Stack Overflow developer survey that you do every year. I liked the loved, dreaded, and wanted slides in particular because I think they provide a snapshot of where things are. As you look at this list, and I know the screen is small for you there, Rust is on top of the most loved, followed by Swift, F#. What does this ranking tell you about the state of software development right now?
Not so much. One of the things that I've noticed over, probably after a long career in software development is, first of all, there is kind of a desire to use the latest cool new thing. There's also a sort of a contrary-wise desire of let's just use some boring old thing that is known to work, but those people usually don't win. There's also very rapid turnover in the programming field. The number of people that stay as programmers for a long time, without going into that too much, I think a lot of them kind of either move out to management, move into product management, move into maybe architectural type positions. And so the kids keep showing up with their newfangled things that they just invented, and often kind of reinventing the wheel. So the change in what technologies are popular and awful is pretty rapid.
I was surprised to see Swift up so high. This is Apple's programming language.
Who knows? Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Part of it is a lot of you don't really get a choice of what programming language to use because certain programming languages are kind of adapted to certain environments. So if you're writing front-end web development, you're probably using some version of JavaScript. Yeah. And if you're writing iPhone apps, you've had to use Objective-C, which is really, really, really rusty. Sorry, not to confuse the terms. So Swift is a great improvement over Objective-C. I'm not surprised that people were excited by that.
Right, everything's relative. Yeah. Visual Basic on the top of the most dreaded.
Hey,
what?
Wonderful language.
Did this surprise you too?
This is something I never really understood. I guess it taught me a lot about branding. Was that I worked on Excel Basic, and that was it was my project to put the Visual Basic compiler into Excel to be the new macro language for Excel. And at the time, the Basic team had done a lot of surveys, and the name Basic was perceived as being kind of like a low dignity language.
Kind of retro.
Yeah, then it wasn't even retro. It was just like for children or something that was taught in school or whatever. Yeah. It was not a cool language at all. And in fact, most programmers would raise their hands and say, "I don't ever want to do Basic. That sounds horrible." And that maintained. That stayed forever. In reality, the 2/3 of all compilers being sold in 1991 were Visual Basic. It was best selling. If you actually asked just regular people, not professional programmers, all right, you've got to write a macro. Would you rather use Pascal, Basic, C, whatever the languages of the day were, Fortran? They would always say Basic because it sounds like it's going to be easy, and that's what they want, and they have no pride. Even to this day, I mean, the next thing that happened is that when VB.NET came out, or when .NET came out, so it was about 2002, 2003, everybody had a choice of C# or Visual Basic .NET, and they were told they're equivalent in every possible way, just slightly different syntax, and one of them is called Visual Basic .NET, one of them is called C# .NET. And at that point, 90% of the people that had been VB programmers said, well, if it's going to be the same, I'm going to use C# because it's cooler and it's associated with higher salaries and whatever, and the VB community really disappeared.
Yeah, and then of course we got the most wanted with Android at the top. This is probably actually the interesting one. I was surprised Android was at the top of the technology, and Node.js, JavaScript. Yeah.
JavaScript is really kind of surging because it's sort of the one language to, and it's also very frustrating to me watching computer programming languages evolve over 30 years is that the language that we all have to use is never a design language. It's often an accidental language.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so for example, the history of JavaScript, it was created by Brendan Eich, who was not like a computer language genius or anything. He was just an engineer, a decent engineer working at Netscape that was told to come up with a language and basically copied Scheme, and then he was told, go make it look more like Java for marketing purposes. And then he sort of hammered in sort of a Java look, and they renamed it JavaScript, which is horrific. And it still has some of the Scheme origins, but it's got a bunch of mistakes and warts and things that have been half corrected over the years. It is not a language that somebody would come up with and say, this sounds like a great language. It was very, very expedient, and now it has grown. So it's expedient plus lava flow growth of things that, like the lava sort of flows on top of it and then turns into a rock, and you can never change it. That's what that language is like. It is not a great language. It's just dominant. And so we kind of have to live with it. Meanwhile, the Perl was that way, a very hacky, kind of messy language. Basic was pretty hacky and messy. But then the elegant and beautiful languages like ML or Haskell or whatever that came out of academia really never found a niche in the world, even though the languages were better designed.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about your career. Fog Creek Software is essentially the umbrella in many ways.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Although technically they're now 3 separate companies.
Right, exactly. So Stack Overflow, Fog Creek, and Trello.
Trello, yeah.
I want to talk about Trello because it's really interesting. You were essentially able to launch a new project in this new era, a new company essentially. Mm-hmm. And for people, how many Trello users in the audience? Trello is a Kanban-based project management board, and it's wildly successful, wildly popular. What did you learn from launching Trello and the way that you launched it?
Wow, a lot of things. First of all, put it in a little bit of context. Trello has, I don't know what the official numbers are, but let's say 16 million or 17 million registered users, and we're adding over 150,000 users a week. So it's kind of a massive growth. The business is growing very rapidly. They raised a Series A, but the business is doing quite nicely there, almost 100 employees. The metaphor of Trello turned out to be really popular. You say that its origin was in a Kanban board, which it really was, but a Kanban board has a very strict principle of how you work with it. And we kind of removed all those strictures in building Trello. We essentially said, you can use it any way you want. Kanban boards go left to right. You can go right to left. You don't even have to. You can just put different things in different columns. And we ended up making a tool that was very accommodating to people that just wanted to use it in whatever way made sense to them.
Yeah, would you do anything differently? You launched that in 2011.
Yeah.
Would you do anything differently today in 2016 in terms of how you developed the project, how you brought it to market?
No, that one was awesome.
And the basic principles were what?
The basic principles, you have a board, and a board consists of lists, and a list consists of cards.
But how'd you come up with the idea and bring it to market?
We were looking at how to figure out what people were doing at work at Fog Creek every single day. And Fog Creek made a product called FogBug, still makes it. It's a great product. It's a bug tracking software. You use it for keeping track of all the details. And in my little company of 50 people, there might be thousands and thousands of currently open bugs and feature ideas and stuff like that. And it was still impossible to tell what anybody was working on, and it was impossible to get that high-level perspective. Yeah. And so the goal of Trello was to say, how do I get people to just concentrate on the perspective, not on all the individual work item tasks? There were sort of a bunch of lessons that came into this that we brought into play all at the same time. One of the lessons is that developers are very fond of outlines. They really love 7 layers of indenting with like here's this detail, and now I've broken it down by into 6 little sub-features, and each sub-feature is broken down into 23 tasks, and each task is broken down into 19 subtasks. And they really kind of love that hierarchy. Regular, what I call civilians, do not understand or enjoy outlines as much. They don't like it. It doesn't make as much sense to them. And for whatever reason, programmers are just blind to this. So we sort of forced ourselves to build Trello with the board, the list, and the cards. And we actually, outside the board, we have groups. And each card can have a checklist, and each checklist can have checklist items. So in effect, there really is an outline there. But the outline is never shown as an outline. It's sort of implemented in terms of different concepts at each level. And even though it sounds arbitrarily more complicated, people understand it a lot better.
So how have the cloud and things like Devops changed the life of the developer in the last 2 to 3 years? What's different, better, and worse?
Oh man, it's just insanely different. I think the biggest difference is that a developer today is using tools that are changing rapidly and that were only invented 15 minutes ago, and they're combining things that have never been used before. So, for example, a carpenter building a house is still going to use drywall, and they're going to still use drywall screws, and they're going to still use some kind of a drill, and the drill may have gotten a little bit more advanced over the years. But if you could build a house 20 years ago, you can build a house today, and there might be a couple of little innovations. With developers, the tools that we used to use seem like unbelievably simplistic compared to the tools you have to use today. You're using much higher level things. The Lego metaphor I like to use is, in 1950, a Lego set consists of these little bricks, and you would snap the bricks together and make a house. Today, you get like the top of Darth Vader and the bottom of Darth Vader, and you snap them together, and now you have a little Darth Vader. And that's what's going on with programming today. You don't get a bunch of 2x4 bricks that you have to build a house out of, and it can't be that creative. What you have instead,
you get to pick the lightsaber, though, right?
Yeah. Well, what you get instead is you choose a lightsaber, and this lightsaber doesn't match that particular Darth Vader guy or whatever, and you just get sort of these larger chunks that you sort of snap together, and there's sort of less creativity available. And when things go wrong, they're going wrong at a lower level that you don't know how to fix. So if you want a Darth Vader, but you want him to have a green hat, that's not an option. That's not a thing you can do with Lego anymore, because Darth Vader always has a black hat.
Yeah. How do you think of operating systems in this new world? Do you think about Android, iOS, Windows, OS X, Linux, or do you think about Azure and AWS? What's most important?
I don't think about it.
Yeah, so how do you think about it? Because it used to be the big Windows, Linux, OS
There used
battle.
to be a huge, well, it was really Windows Macintosh, and now it's actually gone to Android, iOS, and Windows is sort of legacy. I'm sorry, I have to say that in Seattle.
But do you see that, well, and part of it is because Microsoft has struggled on smartphones so much. That's a big reason.
They didn't make the transition to this sort of new age of. I mean, one thing to think about is, it's not really about operating systems, it's about the transition to smartphones, is that kids today are never going to learn how to touch type. They're going to be able to use their phone better. I guarantee you there are kids that write papers in college right now using a phone and using whatever keyboard, just because that's the way they learned how to type. That's actually a better way of typing than a keyboard.
Really? So you're seeing development happen on phones?
Well, development can't happen on phones because Apple has decided to shut that
Right.
down. So this is another problem, is that we're now in a world that's locked down, where you only have the freedoms that have been granted to you by the companies that are involved, and anything that they can shut down for DRM purposes usually, or because they want to keep their store pristine, or they just don't like malware, have dramatically reduced the freedom that used to be available to developers to express themselves.
Diversity, and we got a little bit of time here left.
Oh, you got another 20 minutes.
That's for the next session. I want to get you. So I'm about to get the hook here, but diversity. Obviously, it's an issue across the industry.
Huge.
And you run a community that's largely male.
Probably not, because the community of Stack
okay.
Overflow is all the world's developers.
Yep.
The participation at the highest levels appears to be disproportionately male, but I doubt if it really is.
If you were to do one thing
Yeah.
to make software and engineering more open, inclusive, and diverse as a group, as a movement, what would you do?
I would actually like to see much more. I don't know if does it have to be something I can do?
Yeah.
Or can it be an imaginary thing? What I'd like to do is actually encourage people that are participating on Stack Overflow that are from diverse communities, either women, people of color, et cetera, to self-identify on Stack Overflow, so that they can be role models and set examples for people that are learning programming and for children that are in school that are learning programming, so that the field, what happens when you learn how to program is that you hit a problem and you Google it and you land on Stack Overflow and you see a bunch of men talking about it, or anonymous people. And actually 2/3 of who you see on Stack Overflow are pseudonyms anyway, where you see like a little cartoon character that could be a
Right.
golden retriever, and the name is ZXXXX32, and that's who you're interacting with on Stack Overflow anyway. But you don't see a lot of people of color, you don't see a lot of women participating, and it's not because they're not participating; it's because they're usually shy about their presence online. But if they would participate a lot more, they would set positive role models and make the industry feel a lot less repressive, I hope, and a lot less like a men's club.
Have you thought about doing things to help those people surface their
Yeah,
identity?
you asked me what I would change about Trello, and I don't have anything, but what I would change about Stack Overflow, if I could go back in time, is sort of the default picture that you're given if you don't choose another picture. I would have sort of chosen a random picture of a human being as opposed to what we have now, which is a bunch of little triangles.
Yeah.
And the people that didn't bother setting the picture, their avatar, would get a picture that may be a person of color or a woman.
Right. Joel Spolsky, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Sorry, I feel like we're just getting started there.